Kelly Ford on your radio. Get Kelly down to Jackson. Kelly, you ever been down here? You ever been to Jackson?
I have never been to Jackson, but Jake, I would certainly love to. And as many times as we've talked, I feel like, getting a drink or something after the show would be a fun thing to do.
Hey, we'll make that happen. You just work. We'll talk. Work your schedule. We'll get you down here to these parts at some point.
Love it.
Speaking of these parts, all right. So we've talked through a lot of these teams. There's still some teams that I'm very intrigued by. One, Texas Tech is a team. If you go to the Big 12. Where last year they were kind of on the radar as a quote unquote by the national media as a potential dark horse threat. Now they ended up that got squashed quickly. How good is Texas Tech in this new Big 12?
Texas Tech is a good team, Jake, and I think the Big 12 is such an interesting conference because it's so deep. It doesn't really have a lot of elite power-rated teams at the very top, but it's very deep with regard to the number of teams that might have an opportunity, or a path, I should say, to make it to Arlington. So if I look at Texas Tech, this is a team that I expect from a power rating standpoint to be a little bit better than they were a year ago, a year in which, as you mentioned, there was a lot of love in the preseason for the Red Raiders to maybe be a dark horse in the Big 12 conference. I've got them better on the offensive side of the ball this year than last year. The defense right about the same, projecting in the mid-40s. But if you go game by game down Texas Tech's schedule, there's only a couple games in which right now I currently make them an underdog. Week 6 at Arizona, Big 12 newcomer there in Arizona. That's going to be a tricky game. Arizona's a top 25 power-rated team for me. It's on the road, only the second road trip for the Red Raiders in the year. Back-to-back weeks 9 and 10, road trips to TCU and Iowa State. And then in week 13, a road trip to Oklahoma State. So 4 road trips within conference play. That is what I think is going to determine how good or bad of a season Texas Tech has. Can they go, it probably needs to be at least 2-2, maybe even 3-1 or better in those games. And if they do, I certainly expect Texas Tech to be in that Big 12 race come the end of the year because the schedule sets up pretty nicely for them. It's a top 10 easiest schedule in all of Power 4. And if you're looking at the Big 12 only slate, it's number 11 out of 16 schedules in the Big 12 in terms of conference difficulty. They missed Kansas State. They missed Utah, the two favorites in the conference to start this year. They missed Kansas. They missed UCF, some of the other contenders. So I do think the schedule lays out pretty nicely for the Red Raiders. It's the road trips that I'm looking at, Arizona, Iowa State, TCU, and Oklahoma State. How many of those games can they win? And if it's, I'll say 3 or more, that's a big if. They'll certainly be in a position to be contending for a spot in Arlington.
Group of 5 teams. Liberty obviously got a lot of love last year. They obviously went undefeated and could not hang with Oregon. That thing lasted about a quarter and a half. Then the better team just took over. This year, Liberty's going to have an opportunity to do that again, but then Memphis is getting a lot of love. Boise's getting love. Is there a group of 5 team potentially that could not only get to this playoff, but maybe win a game?
That's a really good question, Jake. I think it's going to be tough for a group of 5 teams to win a game in the playoff. And the reason I say that is it's more likely than not that this group of 5 team is going to be the 12 seed. And when you're the 12 seed, that means you're facing the 5 seed on the road in the first round. That 5 seed is very, very likely going to be, the second, maybe third best team out of either the SEC or the Big Ten. Certainly not one of the champions that they'll get the bye, but it may be a team that lost in one of those conference championship games, maybe a team that didn't make it, but is certainly a really highly power-rated team. So I think being in that 12 spot is going to be very, very difficult. But if we're looking at, which ones are the best from a power rating standpoint, I've got Boise State right now as the favorite to land that G5 spot. They're also my highest-rated non-Power 4 team in the country this year. Memphis, for me, is number 2 on that list, followed by a UTSA team, also out of the American. So I think it's a 3-horse race in the American, UTSA, Tulane, and Memphis, all right there, all projecting within very close projected wins within conference play for me. So I think either the winner of the American or Boise State, if they're able to win the Mountain West. And again, that's a big if. They're the best team in that conference. I expect them to be hosting that Mountain West championship game, but certainly Fresno State, Air Force, UNLV, Wyoming are all going to have something to say about that. Jake, I don't know if a team is good enough to win a game. Who knows? It's a one-off, but having to go on the road that time of year, depending on where they are, I think it's a big, big ask for a group of 5 team if they are indeed that number 12 seed.
Yeah, you would think you would have to have, and again, we'll see how the committee kind of frames this up, a group of 5 team that was so good that maybe they got a 10 seed or maybe even 11th seed, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one path. There's also, Jake, there could be a scenario in which, and doing away of divisions really hurt the non-G5 or the non-Power Fours in this sense. But there could be a scenario in which, what if, a 3-loss team wins the ACC and a 3-loss team wins the Big 12? Like, if we get in that type of scenario, it is possible that you could have a G5 conference champion if they went undefeated or had one loss. They could sneak their way then into the top 4, because remember, those top 4 have to be conference champions. So if we assume the Big Ten and the SEC are going to take 2 of those 4 spots, kind of regardless of what the records are, because I don't expect teams with 3 losses to be playing in that conference championship game. But what about the ACC and the Big 12? If we have a 3-loss champion out of those conferences and an undefeated Boise State or an undefeated, Memphis, it is possible that they could sneak their way into the top 4 seed. And if that's the case, you're getting that first round bye and then playing the quarterfinal at a neutral site, which, of course, you're going to like their chances to win that certainly much more than going on the road in the first round.
How good can Notre Dame be this year, in your opinion? I'll bring that up just because, they just re-upped and got their new contract with NBC. They're not going anywhere. They've set this thing up to where they get the money coming out of NBC plus the money if they make the college football playoff. I mean, they're kind of on par with most of the Big Ten and the SEC financially. Can they get in this conversation this year, or maybe even next year? And of course, next year is a totally different year, to where they are, one of the top teams as far as that we're talking about in late November and December.
Yeah, Notre Dame, certainly from a brand recognition standpoint, which we can argue how much that should matter. I think the reality is it does matter. Notre Dame's up there with anybody. And I know they just had a devastating injury at left tackle here in the last couple of days that was reported. So certainly that's going to hurt their chances this year. But this is still a really good Notre Dame team overall. I've got them power rated right now, number 7, a top 10 offense, which would be the best offense that we've seen in South Bend since 2015, and a top 10 defense right now projecting number 9. If they do finish at 9 or better, this would be the best Notre Dame defense of the CFP era by my numbers. So Notre Dame has a big opportunity in front of them this year, and the schedule is actually pretty favorable for Notre Dame. In most years, Notre Dame plays one of the most difficult schedules in the country. This year, they do not. It's number 58 out of 68 with regard to my schedule difficulty in Power 4, so it's the 11th easiest Power 4 schedule. The only game this year that my numbers currently assign less than a 65% win expectancy is that week 1 game to start the season on the road at Texas A&M in College Station. I have that one right now as a 50-50 game. So that one's a complete toss-up. But after that, Notre Dame's looking like a favorite in each of their remaining games. Because the schedule is a little softer, my numbers suggest that 11-1 would be the required win total to get into really CFP conversation. But I'm going to say that if Notre Dame finishes 10-2, regardless of the schedule faced, I don't believe the CFP committee would keep a 10-win Notre Dame team out of the playoff in some form or fashion in those seeds 5 through 12. So I think if Notre Dame can get to 10 wins, which my numbers right now give a 76% chance to happen, they're going to find themselves in the playoff this year. And I do expect Notre Dame to be a perennial playoff contender in the 12-team era. I mean, Jake, they made it a handful of times in the 4-team era. There's really no reason to suggest that they won't in the 12-team. Not to mention they also went to that BCS National Championship game in 2012, I think it was. So this is a program that has contended at the highest levels in recent years. They haven't won a national championship since the 80s, I don't believe. But certainly there's someone who I expect to be there year in and year out in a 12-team playoff.
Totally agree. Kelly Ford, make sure to give him a follow on X at KFordRatings. Go to KFordRatings.com. Kelly, I appreciate you as always. Have a great week. We'll do it again next week.
Thanks, Jake. You too.